Families tear themselves apart for money, but true wealth often hides in plain sight. Avery's bank account held exactly $14.32. She was 23, sleeping in a freezing Honda Civic, and utterly desperate. So when the county auctioned off an abandoned Xintantum rotting post office for a single dollar, she bought it. She had no idea the rusted steel vault hidden in the basement was about to make her the target of a ruthless millionaire and uncover a 70-year-old federal conspiracy. The wind howling through Grafton felt like a personal insult. 23-year-old Avery Hastings sat in the back row of the Grafton County Municipal Gymnasium, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm paper cup of diner coffee, trying to absorb the heat before her fingers went completely numb. She was not there to buy property. She was there because the gymnasium was heated and her 1998 Honda Civic, parked outside with a failing alternator and a trunk full of her only worldly possessions, was not. Avery had hit rock bottom weeks earlier. A sudden medical emergency involving her younger sister had drained her meager savings, and a subsequent layoff from her data entry job had severed her only lifeline. Evicted and exhausted, she was surviving on dollar menu items and sheer, stubborn willpower. At the front of the gym, county auctioneer Marcus Brewster, a balding man with a microphone that constantly gave feedback, droned through the list of tax-delinquent properties. Lot 42, Brewster announced, adjusting his glasses. The old municipal post office at 402 Elm Street, abandoned since the late 1980s, structurally compromised. The county is absorbing the back taxes. We just want it off the ledger. Let's start the bidding at $5,000. Silence echoed in the gymnasium. A few local contractors chuckled. Everyone in Grafton knew the old Elm Street post office. It was a gargantuan, crumbling monolith of grey stone, its windows boarded up, its roof partially caved in. It was an asbestos-filled liability, a black hole for anyone's wallet. 2,000, Brewster pleaded. 1,000? Come on, folks, the land alone is worth something. More silence. Brewster sighed, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the drafty room. $50. I'll take $50. When no one moved, Brewster gripped the podium. $1. I'm asking for a single $1 bill to transfer the deed of 402 Elm Street. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. Maybe it was the crushing weight of her reality, the desperate, clawing need to own something, to have a door she could lock that was not attached to a dying Honda. Without thinking, Avery raised her hand. Brewster's eyes snapped to the back of the room. Sold to the young woman in the back for $1. A collective gasp, followed by murmurs of pity and amusement, rippled through the room. Avery lowered her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a crumpled $1 bill, and walked down the aisle. She had just bought a 6,000 square foot disaster zone. Hours later, armed with a heavy brass key and a terrifying legal deed, Avery stood before 402 Elm Street. The building was an imposing relic of 1920s federal architecture, flanked by decaying stone pillars. The front doors were heavy oak, scarred by decades of harsh New England winters and local vandals. She pushed the key into the rusted lock. It required a hard grind and twist, but the mechanism finally gave way with a heavy clack. Inside, the smell hit her first as a suffocating mixture of mildew, dry rot, and old paper. Dust motes danced in the pale shafts of light, piercing through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The main lobby was a graveyard of mail carts and shattered glass. Old, faded wanted posters from the 1980s still clung stubbornly to the corkboards. What have I done? Avery thought. the sheer scale of her mistake crashing down on her. The roof in the sorting room had failed, leaving a massive pile of soggy debris on the hardwood floor. It would take tens of thousands of dollars just to make it habitable, money she did not have. But as she walked through the supervisor's office at the back of the building, her foot caught on something, a heavy iron ring flush with the floorboards hidden beneath a rotting rug, a trapdoor. Grabbing a discarded piece of metal piping, Avery pried the trapdoor open. A narrow concrete staircase spiraled down into pitch blackness. She pulled out her cracked smartphone, turned on the flashlight, and descended into the freezing air of the basement. The basement was surprisingly dry, unlike the floors above. It was a sprawling, low-ceiling space filled with rusted filing cabinets, but it was not the cabinets that caught Avery's attention. At the far end of the room, behind a partially collapsed wall of cheap drywall that looked like it had been hastily erected in the 1980s, sat a monster. It was a Mosler safe, a massive floor-to-ceiling bank vault entirely out of place in a municipal post office. The steel door was at least 10 inches thick, painted a dull, chipping olive green, and secured by a heavy brass combination dial and a massive spoked wheel. The Mosler Safe Company logo, faded but unmistakable, was emblazoned across the top. Avery walked up to it, her breath pluming in the cold air. She pressed her hand against the freezing steel. It did not hum. It did not rattle. It was perfectly, immovably solid. Why would a small-town post office need a vault designed to withstand military explosives? And more importantly, why had someone gone through the trouble of building a fake wall to hide it before the building was abandoned? She tried the heavy, spoked wheel. It did not budge a millimeter. The vault was locked tight, and inside, lying dormant for decades, was a secret that was about to flip her world upside down. The town of Grafton was buzzing with the news. The local diner, a greasy spoon named the Copper Kettle, was alight with gossip about the crazy broke girl who bought the town's biggest eyesore. Avery was sitting in a corner booth nursing a glass of tap water and utilizing the diner's free Wi-Fi to research Mosler safes when a shadow fell over her table. She looked up to see a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored camel hair coat that cost more than Avery had earned in her entire life. He had sharp, predatory eyes and a smile that did not reach them. "Avery Hastings, I presume," he said, sliding into the booth opposite her without an invitation. "I'm Victor Langford, Langford Development." Avery knew the name. Langford owned half the commercial real estate in the county. He was the kind of man who bought up struggling family farms and turned them into strip malls. "Can I help you, Mr. Langford?" Avery asked, keeping her tone neutral. "I heard about your little acquisition at the auction," Langford said, steepling his fingers. $1, quite the bargain. But let's be realistic, Ms. Hastings, that building is a death trap. The asbestos removal alone will bankrupt you, not to mention the structural fines the city will start levying against you soon. I'm aware of the challenges." Avery lied smoothly. "I'm a man who appreciates ambition. But I also recognize a sinking ship," Langford continued, reaching into his coat and pulling out a sleek leather checkbook. "I need the land for a new logistics center. Now, I'm prepared to offer you $5,000 right now. You walk away with a massive profit and you never have to step foot in that rotting husk again." Avery stared at the pen hovering over the checkbook. $5,000. It would fix her car. It would get her a warm apartment. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. But her mind flashed back to the basement, to the hastily erected drywall, to the massive, hidden Mosler vault. Why was a multi-millionaire developer personally tracking down a 23-year-old at a diner the morning after an auction for a building everyone claimed was worthless? 10,000, Langford said suddenly, misinterpreting her silence. He clicked his pen. $10,000, Avery, right now. The desperation in his voice was microscopic, but Avery heard it. He did not want the land. He wanted what was inside the building. He knew about the vault. "The building is not for sale, Mr. Langford," Avery said, sliding out of the booth. Langford's fake smile vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, hard glare. "You are playing a game you do not understand, little girl. That building will ruin you. Sell it to me now, or I promise you will be begging me to take it off your hands soon." "Have a good day, Victor," Avery said, walking out of the diner. Her heart was racing. She needed to get that vault open, and she needed to do it immediately. Through a deep dive on obscure locksmithing forums, Avery found her man, Earl Hank Caldwell. Hank was a 71-year-old retired bank security consultant who lived in a cluttered Airstream trailer on the edge of town. He was notoriously grumpy, legally blind in his left eye, and arguably one of the best safe crackers on the East Coast. It took Avery hours and her last dollars spent on a six-pack of imported stout to convince Hank to even look at the vault. When Hank finally stood in the freezing basement of the post office, illuminating the Mosler with a heavy-duty work light, he let out a low whistle. "This is not some petty cash drop box, kid," Hank rasped, running his calloused fingers over the brass dial. "This is a Mosler Class 5 solid manganese steel, drill-resistant hard plate, 2 layers of copper to disperse heat from cutting torches. They use these in Federal Reserve branches." "Can you open it?" Avery asked, shivering in her thin jacket. "Depends," Hank said, pulling a massive toolbox from his truck. "Do you have days and a high tolerance for frustration?" Over the following period, the basement became a torture chamber of screeching metal and flying sparks. Hank used a magnetic drill press, attaching it directly to the face of the vault. He went through a dozen diamond-tipped carbide drill bits, cursing vilely every time one snapped against the Mosler's internal glass relockers, booby traps designed to permanently jam the safe if tampered with. The tension outside the building was just as thick. Avery noticed a black Lincoln Navigator idling across the street. She recognized the driver, one of Victor Langford's foremen. They were watching her, waiting. By the end of the effort, Avery was exhausted, covered in metallic dust, and running on nothing but adrenaline. Hank was hunched over the dial, peering through a fiber-optic borescope he had threaded into a microscopic hole he had managed to drill through the casing. "All right," Hank muttered, his voice hoarse. "I am on the wheel pack. I can see the gates." He began turning the massive brass dial. Click, click, click. The sound was deafening in the quiet basement. "First number," Hank said. He spun it the other way. Click, click. "Second number." Avery held her breath. The air felt suffocatingly heavy. Hank spun the dial one last time and stopped. He grabbed the heavy spoked wheel and strained against it. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a waking giant, a deep, metallic groan echoed through the basement. The locking bolts, each as thick as a man's forearm, retracted with a heavy thud. "We are here," Hank gasped, stepping back, sweat pouring down his wrinkled face. "Pull it!" Avery stepped forward. Her hands were shaking violently. She grabbed the cold steel of the wheel and pulled with all her might. The massive 10-inch thick door swung outward on its heavy lubricated hinges, perfectly balanced despite weighing over a ton. The stale preserved air washed over them. Avery grabbed the work light and stepped inside the vault. She expected to see rows of empty safe deposit boxes, or perhaps canvas bags of forgotten cash. Instead, the vault was almost entirely empty, save for two things sitting in the center of the concrete floor. The first was a mountain of canvas mailbags tied shut, the canvas rotting away to reveal thousands of pristine, undelivered letters. But it was not the letters that made Avery's blood run cold. Sitting next to the mailbags was a heavy reinforced wooden crate. It was wrapped in thick steel banding and stamped perfectly into the wood on the side of the crate in faded red ink was the seal of the United States Department of Defense, accompanied by a stark, terrifying warning. Property of U.S. government. Do not open. Level 4 contamination hazard. Avery stared at the crate, the silence of the basement suddenly deafening. She had not just bought an abandoned post office. She had bought a government secret. And judging by the heavy footsteps suddenly echoing on the hardwood floor above them, Victor Langford was tired of waiting. The heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor above them were deliberate, methodical, and accompanied by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Someone had kicked in the boarded-up side entrance of the post office. Down in the basement, the air froze in Avery's lungs. Hank instantly killed the high-powered work light, plunging the basement into an impenetrable darkness, save for the weak, dying beam of Avery's smartphone. "Turn that off, kid," Hank hissed, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. He reached into his heavy canvas tool bag and pulled out a heavy steel pry bar. "We got company, and they did not knock." "Mr. Langford?" Avery whispered back, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped her phone as she powered the screen down. "Probably his muscle," Hank muttered. "Old man Langford does not get his Italian loafers dusty. Listen to me, the coal chute. It is on the north wall behind those filing cabinets. It leads up to the alley. If things go south, you squeeze through there and you run. You do not look back for me." "I am not leaving you," Avery said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You will, if I tell you to." The old safe cracker snapped. The heavy groaning sound of the trapdoor being wrenched open echoed from the top of the concrete stairs. A beam of harsh, tactical LED light pierced the gloom of the basement, sweeping across the rusted filing cabinets and the dusty floor. "Miss Hastings!" A deep, booming voice called out. It was not Victor Langford. It was Damien Trent, Langford's head of acquisitions, the man Avery had seen idling in the Lincoln Navigator. "Victor sent me down to help you pack. He said the structural integrity of this building is severely compromised. It is for your own safety." Heavy combat boots began descending the concrete steps. Clack, clack, clack. Avery looked at the vault. The last thing she truly noticed was the wider opening and the mailbags. If Trent saw what was inside, she was dead. Or worse, she would disappear, becoming just another Grafton County cold case. She had seconds to act. She darted into the vault, her sneakers completely silent on the concrete. She did not have time to mess with the steel banding on the terrifying wooden crate. Instead, she grabbed the top layer of the canvas mailbags. The rotted fabric tore instantly in her hands, spilling a cascade of pristine yellowed envelopes onto the floor. Beneath the letters was a heavy manila envelope wrapped in thick, black electrical tape. It felt solid, heavy. She shoved the taped envelope and handful of the scattered letters into her oversized jacket, zipped it up to her chin and darted back out of the vault just as Trent's flashlight beam hit the fake drywall partition. "Well, well," Trent's voice echoed through the basement. He stepped around the corner, his tactical light illuminating the massive open Mosler safe. He let out a low whistle. "Old man Langford was right. You did find it." Trent was not alone. Two other men, built like linebackers and wearing dark tactical gear, stepped out of the shadows behind him. "Back away from the safe, little girl," Trent ordered, pulling a heavy suppressed automatic pistol from his shoulder holster. Hank did not hesitate. With a feral grunt, the 71-year-old safecracker hurled a heavy brass dial puller right at Trent's face, simultaneously kicking over a rusted metal shelving unit. The massive crash of cascading steel and old paperwork filled the basement, kicking up a blinding cloud of decades-old dust and asbestos. "Run, Avery!" Hank bellowed, charging the two goons with his pry bar raised. Gunfire, stifled by the suppressor to sound like violent coughs, punched through the darkness, shattering the concrete behind Avery's head. Panic seized her, pure and absolute, but survival instincts overrode her fear. She scrambled over the fallen shelves, diving behind the rusted filing cabinets as the basement erupted into a chaotic brawl. She found the old coal chute exactly where Hank said it would be. The iron hatch was rusted shut, but the sheer, unadulterated terror pumping through her veins gave her strength she did not know she possessed. She slammed her shoulder against the iron plate. Once, twice. With a screech of tearing rust, it gave way. Avery squeezed her body into the narrow, filthy shaft, clawing her way upward toward the faint sliver of moonlight. She burst out into the freezing alleyway, scraping her elbows raw on the brickwork, and tumbled into a pile of wet garbage. She did not stop. She scrambled to her feet and sprinted into the tree line bordering Elm Street, the freezing New Hampshire wind biting at her tear-stained face. She ran until her lungs burned with the taste of copper, until the imposing silhouette of the abandoned post office was swallowed by the night. Later, shivering uncontrollably in the back booth of a 24-hour truck stop miles outside of town, Avery finally opened her jacket. She pulled out the handful of letters and the heavy manila envelope. The letters were all addressed to various federal agencies: the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Office of the Inspector General. The return address on all of them was the same: William Hargrove, Postmaster, Grafton Branch, 1980s. She tore open the first letter. It was a frantic, handwritten confession. "If you are reading this, they have already killed me." The letter began. "My name is Bill Hargrove. For the last 2 years, I have intercepted illegal shipments moving through this county. Governor Harlan Langford, Victor's father, has been using his political leverage to siphon classified defense assets from the decommissioned Pease Air Force Base." Avery's eyes widened. She read faster. "They claimed Project Orion was a toxic waste disposal initiative. It is a lie. The DoD crates do not contain lethal contaminants. They contain unregistered Treasury bearer bonds and the original land deeds to the entire northern quadrant of the county, land the federal government secretly bought up during the Cold War. The Langford family has been orchestrating a massive land grab, stealing billions from the American public. I hid the final shipment in the newly installed Mosler vault and faked an asbestos contamination to get the building condemned. It was the only way to protect the evidence. I have attached the ledger. Do not trust the local police. The Langfords own them all." Avery dropped the letter. Her hands were shaking violently, not from the cold, but from the terrifying realization of what she held. She grabbed the heavy taped manila envelope and used a pen to rip through the thick electrical tape. A small black leather ledger fell onto the sticky diner table along with a thick stack of crisp green paper. She picked up one of the papers. It was an authentic 1980s-era United States Treasury bearer bond. The denomination printed in the corner made her choke on her own breath. $1 million. There were at least 50 of them in the stack. $50 million in untraceable, completely legal tender, alongside a ledger that perfectly documented decades of systemic corruption, theft, and murder orchestrated by the Langford family. Victor Langford did not want the post office. He did not even want the bonds. He wanted the ledger. The ledger was the only thing that could rip his billion-dollar empire to the ground and put him in a federal penitentiary for the rest of his life. And now, a 23-year-old girl who had been sleeping in her Honda Civic possessed it. A phone buzzed, shattering the silence of the diner. It was an unknown number. She stared at it for a long moment before answering, pressing the speaker to her ear. Avery, a smooth, chilling voice said. It was Victor Langford. You caused quite a mess in my new building tonight. Where is Hank? Avery demanded, her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to sound brave. Mr. Caldwell is currently resting comfortably in the trunk of my car, Langford replied smoothly. He is a stubborn old man, but he does not have to die. Neither do you. You have something that belongs to my family, Avery. I want it back. You mean the proof that your father was a thief and a traitor? Avery snapped, her anger temporarily eclipsing her terror. Langford chuckled, a dry, lifeless sound. You are out of your depth, little girl. You think anyone is going to believe a homeless drifter? The police chief works for me. The county judge works for me. If you go to the authorities, you will be arrested for breaking and entering, and Hank will be found at the bottom of the quarry. You have until tomorrow morning. Bring the envelope to the old lumber mill on Route 9. Come alone, and I will give you $1 million in cash and let the old man go. If you do not. The line went dead. Avery stared at the black screen of her phone. She was completely isolated. She could not call the local police. She could not run. Langford had her only friend in this town. But as she looked down at the letters of Postmaster William Hargrove, a desperate, reckless plan began to form in her mind. Langford thought she was just a scared kid. He was about to find out exactly what happens when you corner someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose. A heavy mist clung to the abandoned Route 9 lumber mill, turning its rotting structures into ghostly silhouettes. Avery's battered Civic rolled onto the gravel, coughing to a stop. She stepped out, clutching her messenger bag, heart pounding, but resolve unshaken. Victor Langford waited in the loading bay, flanked by armed men. A metal briefcase rested nearby, his version of leverage. "Did you bring it?" he called. "Where is Hank?" Avery shot back. Langford signaled, and Hank was dragged from the trunk, bruised but alive. "Let him go." "Show the bag first," Langford replied coolly, offering $1 million payoff. Avery hesitated, then stepped forward, pulling out a duct-taped envelope. Langford's eyes gleamed. He nodded to his man. "Take it, then shoot him." "No!" Avery shouted. Sharp, deliberate. The signal. An armored vehicle smashed through the gates as FBI agents stormed the mill, weapons raised. Red laser sights cut through the fog. Langford froze as agents swarmed him. "You are under arrest," Agent Reed announced. Langford raged, denying everything until Avery calmly handed over the real ledger she had hidden on her. "The proof," she said quietly. Hours earlier she had called the FBI, trading fear for strategy. Now, as Langford was dragged away, his empire collapsing, Avery rushed to Hank. "You are insane," he rasped. She smiled through tears. "You told me to run. I just chose the right direction." The aftermath of the lumber mill bust became national news. The FBI raided the old post office, securing the Mosler vault and extracting the DOD crate. Inside, they found exactly what the ledger promised. $50 million in stolen bearer bonds and the original deeds to hundreds of thousands of acres of stolen land. The entire Langford empire crumbled overnight, seized by the federal government under racketeering charges. As for Avery Hastings, under the False Claims Act, a federal law that allows private citizens to sue on behalf of the government for fraud and receive a percentage of the recovered funds, Avery was officially recognized as a federal whistleblower. Because her evidence led to the recovery of stolen Treasury assets and land, a federal judge awarded her a bounty. It was not $1 million in a shady aluminum briefcase, it was 15% of the recovered assets, $7.5 million. Months later, Avery stood in front of 402 Elm Street. The scaffolding was up and construction crews were busy tearing off the rotted roof. She had not sold the building. Instead, she had hired Hank Caldwell as her lead project manager. They were turning the old post office into a community center and a low-income housing complex, a permanent anchor of hope in a town that Langford had tried to bleed dry. She walked up to the heavy oak doors, running her hand along the scarred wood. She thought about the terrified, desperate girl who had sat in that freezing gymnasium, raising her hand to spend her last dollar on a ruined building. Sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to discover what is buried beneath it. And for Avery Hastings, the ultimate treasure was not the millions in the bank. It was the steel in her spine, forged in the darkness of a forgotten vault. If this wild, true story of survival, hidden federal secrets, and a young woman outsmarting a corrupt millionaire kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this incredible true crime tale with your friends to spread the word about Avery's bravery. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable, crazy, real-life mysteries uncovered from the past. See you next time.